domain skills are still really valuable in the era of AI, but you have to be able to capitalize on those domain skills and kind of scale them and make them as impactful as possible by at least being conversant with how to use AI. And the biggest challenge for most people isn't necessarily using the tools themselves. Some of them are pretty easy to use. It's kind of deconstructing the way they work and then rebuilding it with those tools at the center. I do think, though, we are in danger of sleepwalking into a problem that will be many times worse than what was experienced in the 80s with deindustrialization if we're not really serious about training people. And when I talk about training people, it is not going to be solved by online courses or materials just provided by kind of AI tool or application vendors, because the challenge is sort of really linked to, can people work differently in a way that's going to benefit both them and their company? You have to make sure that you are not kind of AI washing or playing lip service to it, right? AI as a toy is, this idea that, oh, we're giving everyone enterprise chat GPT license and they get to experiment with it, but they can't actually do any real work with it because that's too risky. You've got to call BS on that and basically say, what are we doing to make sure our workers can ship the things we need them to ship using this technology, can deliver active kind of projects, work-based outcomes, things that you care about at a functional level, company level, team level, everything else with AI. We are big believers in a right to reskill. Basically, if you want to talk about what the most important worker's right should be in this era, it is a right to reskill and to be given training that is practically useful to you on the job.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Euan Blair from Multiverse to this episode. Euan, before we get much further, could I ask you to introduce yourself and Multiverse, please, to the audience?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Euan, founder and CEO of Multiverse. And for those of you who aren't aware of our work, our mission is to equip the workforce to win in the AI era, in large part because AI is both the biggest threat and the biggest opportunity the workforce is facing. And we want to make sure we really dial up that opportunity. And we work with organizations to diagnose the gaps between their goals and the capability of their people, prescribe learning pathways to kind of fill those gaps, and then deliver the treatment with a mix of human coaches, our agentic coach atlas, and our platform. And the idea is that everyone is going to need training in AI skills if they're going to do their jobs better and faster. We want to reach people who are often overlooked, people in every part of the economy, particularly in kind of frontline non-technology roles. And we want to make sure the pathways exist for both workers to progress, but also for people to be able to enter the workforce with confidence.
Euan, thank you. And AI is clearly changing very quickly. How are skills evolving from your perspective in this as we enter this AI world?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of points there. I think the first is probably some people almost underestimate the sheer ubiquity of the need for AI skilling, right? This is an everyone problem. AI is not the domain of the technologist. We train nurses and doctors, operations managers, retail workers, factory workers, financial analysts, people in nearly every part of the economy, because domain skills are still really valuable in the era of AI. But you have to be able to capitalize on those domain skills and kind of scale them and make them as impactful as possible by at least being conversant with how to use AI. And the biggest challenge for most people isn't necessarily using the tools themselves. Some of them are pretty easy to use. It's kind of deconstructing the way they work and then rebuilding it with those tools at the center. It's being able to understand actually what is permissible and allowed within your organization, given InfoSec, data privacy, various legal restrictions. We do an increasing amount of work in Europe, where of course you've got the EU AI Act to deal with. And then, this point has been well made, but it is important. Human skills still matter. Judgment, taste, leadership, change management, all of these things. But the big headline on AI skilling is just, this is an everyone thing, and the workforce will increasingly bifurcate between those who have AI skills and, not just kind of how to prompt, but actually a deep understanding of how to use AI to do your job quicker and better, and those who don't. And so we've got to make sure as many people as possible fall in the former category so we don't see mass job displacement.
And this issue of mass job displacement, I think, is really interesting. Um, People are talking about, humans in the loop and ensuring that you have a team made up of kind of AI agents, but also human agents. How do you see people and agents coming together and working together?
Well, look, the good news is AI in and of itself doesn't actually have to displace humans. And if you look at most of the organizations we're working with, they're not at the moment making material cuts to their workforce as a result of AI. They're actually looking at opportunities to kind of, yes, drive productivity, but also find new business lines, new ways of generating revenue, new ways of performing more with less. We work a lot in the public sector, including with higher education institutions, but also the health service. This is a great example where there is a scarcity issue at the moment, and you can kind of sort of flip that on its head and turn it into abundance if you can empower key practitioners in that sector to be able to reach many more people and still do it with a high level of skill and fidelity. I do think, though, we are in danger of sleepwalking into a problem that will be many times worse than what was experienced in the 80s with deindustrialization if we're not really serious about training people. And when I talk about training people, it is not going to be solved by online courses or materials just provided by kind of AI tool or application vendors, because the challenge is sort of really linked to, can people work differently in a way that's going to benefit both them and their company? And that requires hands on the keyboard learning. It requires learning in the flow of work. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about apprenticeships, because it's the purest expression of learning on the job, but it is equally beneficial to the worker and the employer. And you need those things to work in lockstep if everyone's going to benefit from this.
One of the things about, getting people into apprenticeships and I agree, it is an important development, is because, and you're already seeing it in terms of the press, in terms of the impact of AI, particularly for in terms of careers for people at different levels. How do you see AI impacting jobs, particularly when people are at the start of their careers? I'm thinking of the graduates that are coming out of
Yeah.
Brunel and other universities. People who are leaving school at 18 may decide not to go to university. How do you see these early career jobs and roles being impacted?
So I think the largest way they're being impacted at the moment is companies are quite hesitant about bringing lots of new talent into their workforce when they have a pretty clear hunch that the shapes of their workforce will change quite dramatically and their needs will change quite dramatically. Now, there are also some edges that the younger generation has. They tend to be more AI native than most, which gives them an advantage. There'd be a hell of a lot more AI native if the education system took seriously equipping people with AI skills and getting them, effective with AI at a much earlier age. But you do have a sort of problem that ripples across the labor market. If older workers can't upskill and move up in their career, that leaves less room for new talent to enter the workforce. You've got this kind of 40 to 49-year-old age bracket at the moment that is the most productive demographic of the economy. And yet these workers are often overlooked in terms of skills and training that they need. And we are seeing plenty of threats to kind of incumbent workforce around just simple job displacement, because of the advance of technology. If you are over the age of 50 and you lose your job, the chances of you getting a new one in many cases are quite small. Whereas if you're in your 20s and you are either looking for a job or you have a job already, it's much easier to get hired. So we've got to look at this in the round. This is an every age and every stage problem. We need clear on-ramps for talent and skilling at the earliest stage, again, through apprenticeships, but also other routes. And you need pathways for older workers to develop and make sure they don't end up becoming obsolete. Because the reality is that is just a material threat. And the societal implications of that will be pretty dire if we get it wrong. Unemployment rates are ticking up faster than any of us would like. And this can turn from a kind of trickle into a flood if we're not careful.
And you can begin to see that playing out in some of the data that's coming through. And if that's about people at the early career, and you've touched on people at the kind of mid and late career or later career, um, any further thoughts on what can be done to support those people to, if they're mid and late career, to either hold on to their roles, or if they should get displaced, or which is a polite way of saying losing their job, how can they? What are those on ramps to help them get back on the get back into a job?
Yeah. Well, the reality is, by the way, there aren't a particularly good or effective series of on-ramps for older workers who lose their jobs. And there are plenty of pretty serious barriers, which is why, again, prevention is always better than the cure, right? Let's start with making sure people don't lose their jobs in the first place. And the only way you're going to do that is every company, I speak to CEOs, CIOs, COOs of businesses on a regular basis. I probably meet 5 to 10 a week, right? And they're all obsessed with productivity. They all know that there are these sunny uplands where AI accelerates their workforce. They massively struggle around implementation and adoption. And often that is because their general workforce aren't skilled in this area. And it's quite different equipping someone with AI skills who might be a nurse, where their biggest issue is triaging patients safely and effectively, versus someone who's working in a factory where they're trying to optimize the production line. And these things require a series of use cases and projects built around AI. We spend most of our time on really kind of delving into what are some of the things you and your role can do with AI. We've got examples of a purchasing assistant at a retailer who built an automated stock out alert, which sends out communications when stock's running low, saving £150,000 in lost revenue. We've got a council worker who's built an AI triage process that basically spots invalid eviction notices in seconds, which prevents homelessness, saves the council thousands, and reduces the kind of burden that council was suffering in trying to deal with the consequences of these issues. And it's amazing what you see in the health service. We've had frontline NHS workers. We've got one at Royal Free who basically digitized the patient journey, which helped double the daily department caseload. And it brought down patient waiting times by a third. These are profound impacts that non-technology workers, normal workers, are having with AI. And if you can show your employer you're doing that sort of thing, right, you're not going to get displaced. They're going to want more of it. So we've just got to empower people to develop those things.
I mean, some of those productivity improvements you've just mentioned are absolutely incredible. Um, what impact are you beginning to see, or what impact do you think AI is likely to have on productivity across the economy, really?
Look, in theory, I mean, the OBR alone think it can add tens of billions to GDP over the next few years. We absolutely see the evidence for that, right? In theory, there are very few problems that can't be solved faster by using AI in the right way. The practice, though, is that companies are often trapped in sort of what's permissible against their policies and everything else and what they can actually do with AI. There is a material and growing skills gap, especially given the rate at which foundational models, agentic capabilities, applications are developing. And you've got this sort of gulf between a market where billions has gone into the large language model layer, billions is going into data centers, compute capacity, nearly every AI company under the sun, and yet the adoption layer is lagging behind, right? The kind of capability of leaders, managers, frontline workers is falling further and further behind the technology. And that becomes a real problem where these potential productivity gains basically take far too long to get realized. I mean, I think it was Ken Griffin was saying not too long ago, it could be a 25 to 30 year adoption cycle if we don't figure out better ways of kind of providing people with training.
The point you made about leadership and management and the importance of leadership and management is really interesting, because the CMI talk about the accidental manager, You're really good at you joined the organization 23 or at whatever age. You've worked your way up. You've proven that you know the company, the products, the services, and before you know it, you're a team leader and you've been made a manager without necessarily having any training or development for what it means to be a manager or what it means to be a leader. So they refer to this as the accidental manager. I just wonder how you think AI and how accidental managers and AI are going to kind of come together, if at all.
Well, it's it's kind of interesting because AI can certainly help you manage better. One of the theories that one of the things we're seeing play out is that spans of control, i.e., how many employees a manager is responsible for, are expanding quite quickly. This is actually not a great era to be a middle manager in many ways because there are quite a few threats as companies look to drive efficiency at that layer. Um, but of course, management, like anything, is something that requires deliberate training and thought and time spent on it. Now, we ourselves aren't spending a huge amount of time kind of training managers in how to be better managers, but we are training them in how to use AI to do their jobs better and manage more effectively. And I think both things are really important. But I'll come back to the ubiquity point. It sort of doesn't matter whether you're a manager, a young person at the start of your career, or a much older worker who's got kind of frontline responsibilities and is just an individual contributor. AI will affect and change your job if and you basically you either become a victim of it or you become a protagonist in making it clear to your organization that you can use these capabilities to deliver value.
And in terms of productivity, you're right. There is an awful lot about AI improving productivity, and clearly, the government with their AI action plan are putting a great deal of store
Yep.
by AI and having a big boost in terms of growing the economy. But in what way do you see skills impacting productivity?
I mean, skills are basically the best ROI initiative pretty much across the economy in terms of what they deliver in tangible, measurable gains that impact everything from kind of GDP growth to profitability of organizations. And you're seeing with AI at the moment, it's often the equivalent of imagine having an iPhone and only using it to make calls or maybe send text messages. There's a lot of just basic automation and kind of pretty lowbrow stuff happening with it. And there's this entire landscape of incredible things you could be doing. You can only unlock those things by being trained on them. And generic training itself is insufficient because, we work with nuclear power stations, we work with the Ministry of Defense, we work with people dealing with all sorts of kind of confidential information and working under all sorts of restrictions. And you have to be able to provide solutions that are compliant with that company's sort of or organization's needs, capabilities, and context. And so we spend a lot of time doing that because, again, the biggest point I would make on skills is generic training alone will always be insufficient.
In terms of that bridge from kind of generic training to
Mm.
company specific training, where does that responsibility lie? Because increasingly companies and I hear this when I talk to senior managers. I'd like to invest in my people. I'd like to send them on training programs, but I send them on a training program. They upgrade their skills. They become really good. And before you know it, they've left and now they're working for a competitor and using those very skills that I paid for against me in my organization. So, you know, where does that responsibility for that training lie, though?
So I think it's a collective one, right? Government must and fortunately does to an extent already, but needs to a greater extent play a role in this in terms of making sure everyone has access to the skills they need. We are big believers in a right to reskill. Basically, if you want to talk about what the most important workers' right should be in this era, it is a right to reskill and to be given training that is practically useful to you on the job. I think most employers, and there are different views on this. would rather have someone who is a much more capable and effective employee who might leave them because there are other opportunities down the line than have someone who is less capable and effective in their job but will be there forever. Right. So I think it's a sort of false economy to say, hey, if we make them better at their job, they could go to someone else. Also say, look at your employer value proposition. Let's maybe make it more appealing. And by the way, offering to train people is definitely one thing. We see massive frustration through the workforce of workers who, you know, they'll use ChatGPT in their personal lives and they'll think this is incredible. They'll come into work and they'll be using an outdated version of very old software, and they might use a highly locked down version of one or another large language model or AI application. And they're thinking, this is insane. And that creates a lot of frustration and friction. So again, employers have to be prepared to know that their workers might go somewhere more AI native if they're not doing something about it.
And in terms of boards, and
Mm,
as you say, you're talking to
mm.
very senior people in
Yeah.
organizations the whole time. I mean, what should boards do to, prepare for this, what I think is going to be a significant transformation in all their organizations, to prepare their workforce, prepare the board to start with,
Right, right.
and then work your way down. But what's your thoughts in
I
terms of
mean,
what boards should do to prepare themselves?
this has to be the single biggest thing they're putting pressure on CEOs around, right? Not only because, and we've seen this, if you can show AI benefit in your business, it's incredible for the share price, right? And investors love that. Everyone is after a kind of AI story, but you'll end up with a much better workforce. Any company that doesn't have a sufficiently robust plan, any organization for how they're going to train their workforce and keep them up to date with these capabilities will suffer. And just as the workforce ends up bifurcating between those with AI skills and those without, you'll see organizations bifurcate between those who basically have an AI capable and ready workforce and those who don't. The good news is most CEOs get that and they don't need a huge amount of persuasion around it. But in a world where you're constantly kind of bombarded with various competing priorities, the question is, do they choose to make this the biggest one, or do they kick the can down the road? And it can't just be sort of, okay, we hand this off to our learning team and they're going to deal with it, because you're not then going to get kind of business wide impact. You need business leaders, HR, learning and development, everyone else working together on a solution that is, again, as beneficial to the employee as it is to the employer.
Sticking with boards for a moment, because very often the boards kind of express the view that actually we're here to, improve the workforce, look after our people, but then short-term measures do come into play, and before you know it, they're using AI to reduce headcount and to get that quick fix cost benefit, that they can report into this year's figures, if not this quarter's figures, this year's figures. Do you see a tension there between these kind of short-term, quick benefits from AI versus, I think what I see you're arguing for is taking a much more measured, let's prepare the workforce, let's prepare the organization for this incredible, uncertain future.
Look, there's no question that we will see organizations basically choose to make quick cuts to their workforce as a result of AI. I think it is a short-term gain, right? And, it depends on the company's circumstances. Some people are great at looking at the horizon and kind of focusing on that. Other businesses live entirely quarter to quarter. I think the thing we try and do is basically say, look, there's a whole realm of possibilities here, but actually make this a focus on productivity,
Mhm.
right? And ideally revenue generation and growing the size of the pie rather than artificially cutting your workforce too early. And of course, businesses will make cuts and are making cuts. And that is, part of living in a sort of modern economy as most of the world is structured. But they want to be careful that they don't end up making them in a way that actually damages their ability to grow and cope in the AI era. And you can never guarantee someone's not going to lose their job, but it is much more likely you'll lose your job if, again, you don't have any access or capability when it comes to AI and this emerging technology.
And you can see from some of the figures that are out there, and certainly in some professions, the accountancy
Yep.
profession, the legal profession, the numbers of jobs for entry level employees is reducing. And it almost makes you wonder who's going to be running these companies in a few years' time. You know,
Yeah.
where is that
Yeah.
progression? What's your take
Yeah.
on that?
Well, and look, a lot of companies do still want to bring in talent. They've just got to be convinced that that talent is additive. And so
Mhm.
again, having the right kind of skills, having the right pathways, it's a university degree is no longer seen as a sort of stamp or a guarantee of you being able to get a job. That is both a good and a bad thing, right? It's a good thing in a way because it can create a much a much less kind of singularly focused early employment market. But it can also be a bad thing because we've got a lot of people spending a lot of money going to university who won't ever see those benefits. And this is something I think everyone is trying to work out how to get right. I do believe that organizations are still pretty keen on succession planning and wanting to bring in talent. It's just the right talent, right? And you're going to have a more aggressive market as we kind of try and identify the right talent. One of our jobs, again, is to make sure that we don't fall into historic traps of all the benefits accruing to one small group and everyone else being left behind. You have to make sure that you are not kind of AI washing or playing lip service to it, right? AI as a toy is, this idea that, oh, we're giving everyone enterprise chat GPT license and they get to experiment with it. But they can't actually do any real work with it because that's too risky. You've got to call BS on that and basically say, what are we doing to make sure our workers can ship the things we need them to ship using this technology, can deliver active kind of projects, work-based outcomes, things that you care about at a functional level, company level, team level, everything else with AI. And the only way you're going to do that is by training them on the job. So that is absolutely what I kind of push. Now, context matters. In the NHS, we're typically dealing with lives saved, which is basically your ability to see more patients and treat them better. In the auto industry, we're dealing with cars manufactured. In local authorities, we're dealing with kind of quality of service offered, right? And in most of those cases, the cost base can't go up very dramatically, but you can show that you can do more with the same by investing correctly in AI. So the biggest thing I kind of push companies, boards, everyone else to is let's focus on tangible use cases that are relevant to our business and not some kind of generic, hey, we can show 80% of our people have logged into XYZ tool on a given basis.
Increasingly, companies are measuring how many hours an individual saves from using AI. What are your thoughts on that?
Hours saved is good,
Yeah,
right? But it is still quite a blunt force measure. I think if you can go a step further and sort of, as I say, depending on your team and company goals, translate that. You tend to have three big buckets: cost avoided, cost reduction, and revenue generation.
yeah.
And how are you kind of crystallizing gains against one of those things? And then, as I say, the actual metric itself will differ by company, sector, team. But hours saved is a good start. It shouldn't be the only show in town when it comes to measuring the efficacy of AI.
How do people stay ahead of the wave of AI in terms of careers, in terms of their skills? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it helps to be plugged in, right? There are, plenty of newsletters. By the way, the AI tools themselves are pretty good at summarizing what is happening and the kind of state of AI. It's pretty easy to basically set up a weekly cadence with whatever AI tool you're using so that it gives you sort of what's happening in the market. Speaking to others, I think particularly for business leaders, just understanding what other organizations are doing. What you cannot do though is sort of not keep up with the news in this area because the capability set is accelerating at a clip that we've never seen before in technology. Again, though, I do, and we'll see this particularly in Europe and Britain, AI will be defined less by the bleeding edge capability of the models and more by what you can practically do with it within the confines of your operating environment. And this is where, bespoke training, on the job training matters.
Euan, thank you so much for joining me on the
Pleasure.
AI Adoption Podcast today. We have covered such a wide range of topics in and around skills and how people, and at the end of the day, this is about people, although the technology always seems to dominate, but this is about people. This is about how
Yep.
we are going to be organizing ourselves as in society, because jobs are the way in which we keep society going. And this technology is coming in and having a big impact on the very jobs that we are all doing. You've made some really powerful points around, ensuring that there is an on-ramp for people who get displaced at every level. And I think there is a big issue, and you've raised this, when people, dare I say it, of a certain age, of a very productive age, if they should get displaced and then can't find a job, this has major long-term implications for society. And there is a responsibility on senior leadership within organizations to not just chase the short-term cost benefits and the cost cutting, which is almost in some ways the easier aspect. Much better to think about, how can we use AI to innovate? How do we use AI to grow the business and to generate the revenue that you alluded to? Thank you so much for joining me on the AI Adoption Podcast. And to the listeners out there, I hope you found this episode really enlightening. Euan, thank you.
Thank you.